Hello and welcome to our panel discussion as part of our seventh annual African American Film Series. My name is Essence Wilson, and I am the co founder and chief strategy officer of Communities First. Communities First is a nonprofit organization headquartered in Flint, Michigan, serving the entire state as well as parts of Indiana. Our work really centers around three key areas. We do work related to equitable real estate development, engaged communities, and creating economic opportunity. That has a wide range from affordable housing to we're in the midst of doing a food truck park. We also do movies under the stars. And then, of course, we do things like what you'll see here. As part of our seventh annual African American Film Series, we recently opened up a film called Black Art in the Absence of Light. And so that film is showing currently, and I'll put the link up in just a second so that you can see it if you have not seen it yet. As many of you know, we typically host our event in person at the Flint Institute of Art. And the associate curator of film at the Flint Institute of Art, Ed Bradley, has been a phenomenal champion of and partner in this work. And we were informed that about 2 weeks ago, he did pass away. So I just wanted to acknowledge his contributions to our film series, his commitment to ensuring that every year we could get the films that we needed, and that the dialogue and the conversation and everything was always set up for us. So we will certainly miss him, and I'm sure that he will be missed by many. So as we open today, we have a delightful panel with us that is going to just really illuminate the film and also talk to us from their own experience. And so we actually have someone else that is joining us. So we'll get him set up as we are having the conversation. So we're going to start with our introductions. And I'll ask Anita if you could introduce yourself for us.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Anita Bates. I'm a visual artist and educator at Wayne State University in the Department of Art Education. And I also have been contributing to the arts and culture scene with my personal artwork for over 20 some odd years.
Thank you. Looking forward to hearing more about your thoughts and your experience as we continue on. Donna, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Donna Jackson. I am a artist here in Detroit, Michigan. I run a organization, well, actually a studio, DMJ Studio, that develops cultural and art exhibitions here in Detroit and within Michigan and other places. So good to be here.
Thank you. Vera, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I am a curator working independently in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and a writer. And I came here working at the University of Michigan Museum of Art for a year. But since then, I've been independently writing, giving some lectures, and going to see the art in Detroit as much as I can. So I'm delighted to join you.
Thank you for being with us. And Aaron, if you could just give us a brief 1-minute introduction of yourself.
Yes, my name is Aaron Whitaker. I'm a visual artist here in Flint, Michigan. I've been working with, I consider myself a 360-degree artist, considering that I work with installation, painting, public arts projects, all inclusive. So, and it's a pleasure to be here today.
It's nice to have you. So I think we're going to start with our first question. You've all seen the film. So just can you give us what your first impressions of the film were? And we'll start with Donna.
So, it was marvelous to watch. And one of the first things I thought is, history and the repeating of it. It feels so similar. It feels like that which Driscoll was going through in the 70s, we're feeling that type of energy now, meaning that show, that exhibition bringing to light 200 years of art to mainstream. And I feel like there's this going back and recognizing again the deepness of Black art in this time, especially with what's going on in our society. So I felt this mirroring happening when I was watching that. And one part of it was amazing, and another part is like we're still here, kind of thing. So that was kind of my first impression of it. But amazing film.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that relates to art, but also many of the films that we've shown in the film series. I think we've shown about 28 films, and inevitably you look at it and you reflect on all that has been accomplished, but then so much more work that needs to be done and so much more that needs to happen. Vera, could you share your thoughts and impressions about the film?
Yeah, well, Donna, your comments resonate with me. It made me think of a group that's discussed in the film, the Spiral Group from the 60s and 70s, just that sense that we are kind of circling around, revisiting certain nodes again and again. But it also calls into question this idea of progress, right? That there's some kind of teleological point that we're going to get to. I think that is part of how we are constantly using hierarchies and how we talk about things. So I think that, looking at some of the artwork that was included and discussed, it just really opened up different models of community and understanding and being in the world that are just more kind of three-dimensional, spherical, and just more nuanced. I think that, with so many different stories discussed in that film and such glorious artwork, that's one of the things I took away, how refulgent it really is, this story of a million stories.
Absolutely. And Erin, when you first watched the film, what were your thoughts?
I just found it to be very influential as it relates to being an African American man living in this country, and just the plight that I have experienced and other individuals, both males and women included, where we all are just influenced by stories similar to such, and just how impactful it was towards my development as an artist continuously, and the spaces and places that we can go just from just watching the films as such. It just really can take you to spaces and places that you could almost become remiss from, but by seeing films such as the one that we saw, it just really allowed for me to go into new dimensions as far as how I conduct in society and how I relate as an artist.
Oh, thank you for those reflections. So I'm curious to know about your own journey. We can all probably agree that Black people are underrepresented in the arts, and there's probably many reasons for that. But how did you first establish interest and then move into art as a career? And we can start with Vera.
Thank you, Essence. I briefly shared with you that I started off on a path that was pretty much academic and historical. I was looking at race as a kind of phenomenon in this country and wanted to compare it to other spaces in the globe because my parents were both immigrants. So I wanted to look at, the German experience of the Holocaust and the Third Reich compared to the US. And that, academically, that's really a kind of verboten place to go. It was only recently that people are actually looking at that and trying to change the terminology. But I started off in that way, and I found that to discuss my work and the things I wanted to share with a broader audience, I needed visual culture. And I was very grateful that I was actually trained as a draftsman and with some studio arts that I could say, oh my God, this is very powerful. So I started using photography and posters, actually worked on some racist medals as a way to describe what I was pointing to and to get people to engage with it. It's a very powerful medium, visual culture, and that got me into curating.
It's an interesting journey. It doesn't sound like it was where you thought you would go from the start, but you ended up in a place. And I heard you speaking before we got started, and I could just sense the passion for the work. So I'm grateful that you found your way and ended up where you are. Anita, could you share what your journey and your path has been like?
Well, since childhood, there were two things that I wanted to be. And those things were an artist and an educator. So it was really something that was fostered early on in my childhood life. You know, my parents always immersed us in museum culture, in activities that would engage our creative senses. So we started out at your Heritage House. Those of you who are from the Detroit area, the Heritage House was pioneered by Miss Josephine Love, and it was a place where a lot of artists got their first start. And then it advanced to the DIA, going to museum lessons there. And then when I was 17, I went to study. My mother sent me to study with Allie McGee, and that was made possible because at that time Detroit had a very, very strong arts council where they had the artists who would have these specialized workshops. So that really got me into it. But I think that a lot of my career, a lot of where I am now, has to do with being supported by people who believed in me as an artist. And a lot of times artists don't have an advocate, or they don't have a voice. They feel that things are shut off, that they're shut off from different avenues to help advance themselves. And I know that my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, he was instrumental because he, on a trip back from New York, I called him at the airport and said, look, if we're going to make this work, I need a place to paint. I'm not going back to my grandmother's house. So you need to work this out. So when he picked me up from the airport, brought me to his house, he had turned his dining room into a studio for me. And then from there, like just being, nurtured, my talent nurtured. And really when I established a relationship with George and Namdi, like 20 some odd years ago, just kind of having that tenacity to speak to him and make this kind of relationship, this mentor-mentee relationship work. It kind of brought me into where I am. And then all of those things drove me to want to not only, once I got my MFA in painting, I wanted to translate that into how can I impact people, young people in art. So leading me to getting a PhD in education. So I wrapped all of those things up together, and that's really, how my journey kind of went in a really quick explanation.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I heard you speak about was the importance of family. And so at Communities First, one of the things that we always do is we focus on the family. And so as you think about the different experiences that you had and how that support shaped you and nurtured you, I can totally relate to that. And we've seen that happen in various arts. But I think about, we would take families to the symphony. We didn't just take the kids, we took the family, so that if a student saw themselves in the orchestra, their family could also, mentally picture them in the orchestra and see how it all plays together and how it all coincides. So, and I certainly appreciate the educational component of the work that you do as well, because we certainly have to train and inspire the next generation of artists. Aaron, can you share your journey?
So my beginnings were my humble beginnings began with my grandmother, who was an avid artist and a pioneer. She began in a small podunk country town of Missouri, Pike County to be exact, on a spot that's not even on the map, called Ioya, Missouri. But then it took her, from her elaborate imagination and her abilities to draw, she went to Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, where she worked hard and became eventually an adjunct professor there, which then took her to Lincoln University. Took her to the Everglades in Florida, where she taught at Florida Normal College. But really, what really impacted me was the way that she moved about, being a single black woman with three daughters, and yet allowing her family to be provided for via art. And she would always say things like, "We were rich, but didn't even know it," and it impacted me to really think outside the box. And so, at 5 years old, she had me to draw my first picture. And so through that illustration, I began to more so go into architectural, which was where I first began taking drafting classes and eventually going to Tennessee State University for my first exposures to HBCU. And then I went to Morehouse for a period of time until my grandmother passed away, which brought me back to Michigan, where I eventually went to Oakland University and graduated from there. But upon returning back to Nashville, Tennessee, where my father moved us to, I got back into art. It was quite some time since my grandmother had passed away, and but I never have forgot like what she, allowed me to, really utilize as a pastime more so, and a hobby of drawing and drafting and things of that nature, gardening, and looking at it as everything is a part of art, and art is a part of everything. And so once I got to Nashville and started to get my education degree and my master's in education, I bumped into a fraternity brother who, by the name of Jamal Sheets, who now is runs the museum at Fisk University. When me and Jamal bumped into each other, I would go to his studio. He would say, "Hey man, you seem, by your style, you seem very eclectic. Are you an artist?" And I said, "Man, that's it's by nature." And so ever since then, Jamal teaching me how to do repose art, and then just finding my own way with it, and then picking up some public arts projects. One that I've done right there in Rosa Parks area, where my family actually moved here from Columbus, Georgia, on my father's side. And so that's when I started to get more expansive with how I create art, from just doing it pen and paper to now being able to utilize God's gift of the nature around us. So now I'm looking at art from a therapeutic aspect, going back to get my degree at Wayne State and going into counseling. So utilizing all of my vast background of education, as my grandmother did, but taking it another step higher with art being a way of life and a way of how to reach the public. And so that's pretty much been my journey with art, several shows, um, and just won't stop until the day that I transition, as my grandmother's legacy just continues to live on.
I love hearing you talk about your grandmother and legacy, and again that importance of family and support and early exposure. So Donna, could you tell us about your journey as an artist?
Well, it's a little bit different. I as a kid, I knew I liked art and I did art, but as I got older, I focused on becoming an engineer. The art was something I did to know about myself, but it wasn't something that I was doing to share or to express so that it would go in particular spaces or places. Um, and that's what art was for me for a very, very, very long time. Even the sense of calling myself an artist, I didn't do that for a long time. I think I was in my mid-30s before I did that. So art for me was always this thing that I did to understand who I was as a person and how I fit in the world around me. As far as how family connects to that, because they always do, like that's your environment. Um, Literature, culture, when it comes to museums and music, all of that was always around me. So of course that seeps into you uh, from a visual perspective. But I don't think there were other visual artists in my family at all. It was these other, so, trailblazing in many aspects in that way. I became a brand and marketing person, strategizing and putting things together, what that story looks like for organizations, for companies, for persons. And somehow, well, not somehow, what I was seeing as maybe around 2005 or six, I was in Houston, Texas, seeing the stories of Detroit being written by people that I didn't recognize as Detroiters. And I knew that there was a lot of energy that was not being seen. And so I kind of made this decision that developing platforms for artists to be seen and heard became very important to me. And that's where my journey with art as in the sharing capacity started. Just creating platform after platform after platform to show all the art that I possibly could by artists in Detroit through exhibitions, installations, and that kind of thing. Um, and that got me to meet so many amazing artists. And every now and again, I shared that I was an artist too, and I shared my art, and they're like, "What the heck? Why are you not sharing this with other people?" So recently, maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, I've actually started sharing my art in galleries, in public spaces, with different organizations, and been very, very glad that I've been pushed into those spaces to do that. One key area that I've been focusing on is women in arts. This road of understanding being Black, um, being woman, there's this not obligation, but a necessity to focus on those two groups. And so when doing platforms, I make sure that I make space for women, definitely, Black women, absolutely, to ensure that those stories, those narratives are heard. So I think um, journey wise, that's where I am. I'm actually going to end up being president of Women Caucus of Arts starting next year, again, giving a platform, that platform development. It is a kind of an art for me to develop these platforms to give people space to create. Um, and I see myself continually creating platforms, but also um, cutting out some more time for me to show and create my own art. So I get Driscoll in that way, how he developed these amazing. That exhibition was a platform, and to do that, and then in his later years to really focus on his own creating space. So I got that. So yeah, that's my journey.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you brought up the exhibition. So for those who haven't seen the film, at the core of it, the film was inspired by the late David Driskell's landmark 1976 exhibition that was called 2 Centuries of Black American Art. So the documentary really highlights and features aspects of that aspects of that exhibition and the impact that it had. So that's the next question to each of you. What was the significance of David Driskell's exhibition? And what impact did the show have on artists and the community at that time? And we can start with Anita.
So David Driskell, the one thing I wanted to talk about with respect to David Driskell was that I was so gratified to see this film and to see him having put this together. I thought it was very, very interesting that when he was interviewed about the exhibition, he wanted to make this distinction about Black art and labeling and how Black art tends to be a label that isolates the artist, but it was necessary for the exhibition that he curated to be a show of Black art, because it let people know that even though Black artists have always been around, they're there. Some people have not recognized them. Some people did not understand. There's this notion, right, that we don't see that many Black artists because somehow they're not worthy of being included in the canon of Western art. And I think that exhibition helped debunk some of that. It also, he touched on something that was very interesting, that you can't include everybody, and then some people are mad about how come this person wasn't included, how come this person was, and then that's up to the curator. And I know that some of the focus, it meant a lot for the artists who were in that exhibition to be brought out to the forefront, to be in a museum, because not everybody gets to be in a museum. But the one thing that, and I know that part of our discussion today, we wanted to talk about, there's this issue of Black art, right? But, and I just want to say that for me, when I watched this film, I thought about my own interaction with David Driskell, how years ago I was fortunate enough as a very young artist to see his work at the Sherry Washington Gallery in Detroit. And I thought how ironic that this film is talking about Black art, because there was a gentleman who came to the exhibition who tried to publicly take David to task. He just said, I see this work. David had created these works that were based on quilts, okay? And this gentleman just, how is this Black art? Just in front of everybody. What is this? How is this Black art? And David Driskell went on to explain that this aesthetic that he was working with had to deal with his upbringing and his grandmother and what they, learned as quilt making. And so I kept, over the years, that has stuck with me. So I try not to, the term Black art is kind of a dubious one. I like to say art made by Black folks, and because Black art, I don't know, that's just, and even presenting it to my students, when my young students, they're like, Miss Bates, that's not, why isn't it just art? Why can't it just be art? And I'm like, you have a very good point. And so then we have to talk about the nuances of that. But basically, to answer your question, I think that all of that, him having to explain that journey and putting this together, was very important, in particular to the artists that were represented, because it introduced them to an audience who otherwise would not have seen their work.
Very, very good points there. Vera, what would you say about the exhibition, 2 Centuries of Black American Art? Why was it significant, and what did it mean to the community and to Black artists?
Yeah, very powerful moment. And, we all are indebted to David Driskell in so many ways. I loved how you were speaking about him, Anita, because so many of the artists that I've come to know and work with, or art historians and scholars, they all mention their debt of gratitude to David Driskell. I mean, we're talking about this fantastic show that he put together, but behind it and continuing through his career, he was a resource to keep people working, to show them the community that supported them at times Whereas you mentioned, Donna, not everyone supports the artist in the family. You made me think about it. An artist I have in my family that I come to now and then and forget about because he wasn't honored for being an artist in a culture that really, we're surviving, right? We're trying to survive under really horrendous circumstances in the United States. And parents and families look to push people in a way that they think, well, they will thrive. And the arts don't always get their fair sense of how powerful it can be. So that is something that was not honored in my family, but David Driskell knew how to support artists. So I think it's the show was a kind of expression of how powerful he was, that he could bring all of these different artists together, and that difficult task as a curator to say who's in or who's out. That is a very painful thing for a curator to do. But they're thinking about the audience and what the audience will take away, and they're trying to provide some type of narrative context within the show. So he was making decisions that had to do with who hadn't been seen, who really needs to be seen, but also to create an exhibition making that created these tremendous crowds to come and see. They were so hungry for that show. And it reminds me of other shows that people say, oh, we're so surprised this show has such a draw, like the Soul of a Nation that was going around a few years ago, or other shows that take off, because there's an urgent need on the part of people to see and hear and understand things that aren't normally discussed. So it reminds me almost of there was a show in New York City called Slavery in New York, around 2007, I think. Oh my God, people want to talk about the South and what happened in the South and all of this. Slavery in New York explained that slavery was a business phenomenon all over this country. And people came to that show. It was like the subway at rush hour in that show. People were so hungry for it. And this reminds me of when people can manage to come to an art exhibition, because that's a privilege in itself. In our daily lives and the things that we're doing, that you can bring yourself or your children to see an art exhibition. That itself is telling how people sacrifice to get that beautiful nourishment and joy and healing that we get from this exhibition. So it was a power point for me, a moment of power that still resonates today, and you see it in other powerful exhibitions.
Thank you for that. And Donna, the same question to you. What do you think the significance was to community and also to artists?
One of the things that in the movie, he speaks about the hundreds and how many people came to this exhibition, and how many places the exhibition was seen. And that fascinated me. Again, mirroring a lot of what's going on now. People are hungry to understand the Black experience. And so that was one thing that really, really stuck out with me. And importance from an artist perspective. Again, both Dr. Anita and Vera pointed out how important a moment like having your artwork on the walls of museums can be, how it can transform your career, but it can also transform you as an artist. You may become more focused about what you want to speak to after having an experience like that, and after being on the wall with other contemporary artists, or your art mates, as I call it. So I think those are two things that definitely I got out of it. And I think even today, those two things are still important. or from a point of view of being able to get that many people to take in our narrative as Black folk in that way. And then to also have that many artists seen and experienced in that way. I think technology in some ways help create similar experience, similar, that's very nuanced, but yeah, those stick out for me from the artist's point of view, and then from the curator's point of view. And I know Dr. Anita also understands. I mean, when I heard him talking about picking the art, oh my gosh, I was just like, yes, someone said it out loud. Like that's it's they sometimes artists do not understand that pain and the angst you have as a curator to have to make those choices. But we are, as curators, are artists too. You're telling a narrative, right? And that narrative has to go a particular way in order for when you go through that door to see the art and going out that door, you want people to have some kind of experience. So, but it is a difficult thing to do. So I was very glad to hear that expressed in that movie. I had to say that part. But.
Yeah, no, and actually, that was a great segue for my next question. And I certainly appreciate you speaking to it. And Vera, you brought it up as well, that it's not an easy decision to have to make, and it's not based on who's your friend. You have a responsibility to tell a story, and there's a vision that you have in mind. So the next question, and we can start with Aaron. How do you describe yourself as an artist, and what does your creative process look like?
So and I was finding it very relatable to what I always call, my elders, like doctor or master. So Master Driscoll was speaking about, in terms of telling a story. I consider myself to be a storyteller of the arts. You know, Henry Harper, who's pretty influential in the Black community as far as arts in the city of Detroit, has been known to express the importance that it is for artists to tell the story. And so for me, I being who I am, and finding it important to not only be self-aware, but also be very conscious as to the life of those around me, and paying very close attention to that, but being also able to tell that story in various ways, but with whether it's through pen and paper or brush to canvas or building something, sculpture, so many different forms of it that we can use at the dispense of our blessed hands that God gave us to work with. And so for me, I just, consider myself to be influenced by other artists that I consider to be storytellers. I mean, we all are, but the ones who really hit home and impacted me to be able to say that is what I am versus being so much identified as an artist would be, brothers such as Ed Watkins here in Flint, Michigan, or Avery Boone, or, Laverne Ross, who I seen their work and was able to be right there hand in hand with them as a little boy watching and growing up. Being influenced by my grandmother was one thing, but to be able to see another Black man who was an artist and watch that develop was just as impactful. And it was reminded again by Master Driscoll when watching, Black art in the film. And just what he expressed was of importance, and what I seek to live on through and with is through my legacy will be carried on by the story that I tell, being a griot, So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, and I'm hearing you say that representation matters, those early influences, and being able to see yourself in art, right? Um, and it's interesting, and I was going to mention this a little bit later, but you mentioned the name Ed Watkins, and he has an exhibition right now at the Flint Institute of Art, and it is fantastic. You talk about, being young and going to museums. We took our 3-year-old daughter, and here's a notebook and some crayons. Create in the space where you see things that have been created. And, she had a great time with it. Does she know the magnitude of what she's seeing on the walls? No, but she drew her stick figure and she was quite proud of it. And we were able to take pictures and be in that space. And that's a memory for her. I want to give Vera the opportunity to just talk about, I think it was Fred Wilson who was talking about curating, and you talked about that. You guys talked about the angst that curators experience in having to make those tough decisions. Could you describe, your process when he talked about the research and embedding himself into the museum to see, what the culture was like as he was creating? I'm just curious about how do you go about curating a show?
Right. Yeah, I think it's some type of like a synchronicity or something that, when I know what a project's about, or even if I just have the glimmerings of it and I need to immerse myself further in it, I try to reach out to the artist involved, which is very different from a solo show. To a group show or a show that has a conceptual kind of narrative, right? And I like to work on conceptual shows. But to work on a solo show with an artist, usually it takes for me an investment of getting to know the artist on their own terms. And for me, that means studio visits, again and again. A lot of preparation goes into building that relationship where the artist will trust you to make these choices with them about what can be or should be in the show, and to have a rationale for that, right? It's not like I'm solely decide. I mean, some artists may and have do that, but this is my process. I need to build a relationship. I need to understand the work on multiple levels, and then I feel like I can have a hand in working with that artist for the show. There was a show that I did in Boston where the artist asked me to do the curating once the venue gave him a solo show. And I was so honored by that, but he felt that his work was so controversial that if it wasn't presented in the right way, it wouldn't be fully fleshed out for how kind of critical and radical it was. And so he wanted that kind of deep, slow engagement with it. And that's what I kind of bring to the table. That was the work of James Munford, who's really works in a kind of in-your-face, confrontational manner about racism. And so he wanted the work to be received, right? If it's so radical that people don't want to look at it, right? Then it's kind of, you're missing that communicative moment. And so that was a powerful thing. And, I could go on to being so honored to work with certain artists, but a solo show is very distinctly different from a conceptual show or even a group show. And so a conceptual show for me is so, kind of rejuvenating because for example, I did a show called The Woven Arc, and it was about the narrative, supposed sphere of which art that is woven in some sense would be included. And you brought up, this idea of quilting and how is that art or is it historically embedded? And that's a huge tradition in African American culture, the quilt, right? But there are other kind of textile productions and things that are often considered women's work or it's non-European, which, these are false labels, because if you look at the lace work and embroidery in Europe, I mean, it's incredible, but it's considered women's work. And so some of these things, fall into that same thing about what is art and what is marginalized, right? So the Woven Arc brought in some of that detailed work, quote unquote, women's work, and placed it next to like El Anasui, who's making these huge tapestries of found, objects, battle caps that he smashes and creates these glorious, beautiful things. And his parents were weavers, but he did not want to be considered a weaver. So it brings that all of the kind of disputes and conundrums and paradoxes within a so-called area together, tease them out, and look at them again, right? So we had artists who used beautiful textiles with actual text, right? This group, Kids of Survival in the Bronx, they take the text of, slave productions or W.E.B. Du Bois and mixes them up with fabrics and create. Anyway, the show went on to, vintage visual stuff. But that gave me the opportunity as a curator to seek out new artists that I did not know about. So it pushes you to be comfortable, to go beyond your, area of comfort, right? Where I know about this or I don't know this, I might be hesitant to reach out, but I find the community supports you when you do that, right? And you build new connections and people want to kind of spread, the networks and relationships further. So when I do a conceptual show, I find myself learning and meeting artists I never even dreamed that were in the world. And when I do a solo show, I deepen the relationship with the artists that I only knew on certain levels, right? And for a group show, it's another fantastic dynamic. And I'll just briefly say that what happens in an exhibition is that the artists usually try to come. And then you have this group of artists who may not know each other. And they glory in the presentation and start new relationships. So I guess in there, I'm trying to say it's all about relationship building.
Yeah, and that's not at all what I would have thought the answer would have been, because as someone who is not in that line of work, I can kind of relate a little bit to Donna. So my background is in mechanical engineering, and then doing community development work, right? I don't get that side of it, and I also would relate because I would never consider myself to be an artist, but I enjoy painting, right? And so at what point do you go from it being a hobby to actually being a part of your identity, which I think is, an interesting thing to just kind of think about and reflect on. And so the question that I have for Donna and then Anita is a little bit different. Charles White is quoted as having said that when you create something, it should be about something, and it should be about something that matters. Can you tell us about something that you either created or curated that mattered?
That's a challenging question. So I'll go with curation and then something that matters to me personally in the arts. Just last year, I had the opportunity to develop an exhibition called Souls of Black Folk, based off of the writings of W.E.B. Du Bois. And it was done in a space here in Detroit that has been around for over 100 years. And they definitely show an eclectic group of artists from different backgrounds, Black, brown, everyone. But this was the first exhibition where it was all Black people, all from Detroit, all on the wall at the same time. And starting it I really started this project from a place of loving literature, and then also from a place of W.E.B. talks about the two-ness, the life that we as Black people live in, these two worlds, this world of Blackness and then this other world, at least in the American sense of America. And that's where I came from. And then to actually have it really transform a space into a space of Blackness, by putting the art on the wall, by making sure all the artists were Black, and then even homage to Detroit itself. That was a really amazing experience for me. And I'm glad I had that. And I think that was very purposeful because it did a few things. One, it brought us together. Maybe all of us hadn't been on the wall together. We may have known each other, but maybe not had that experience of being right next to each other in that visual sense. The other thing is we did have other people that did not know about this particular space. Now they know it and they see this as a safe space for them to enjoy art as well. This space is for you. You belong in that space. So that was one particular experience that I think I created something that mattered. Personally, I've decided that as I am learning to share my art and put my art on the wall, I also see art as practice and have made it a daily thing to develop art every day as a practice, just like I would practice meditating or I would practice anything else. I want to do this daily because I want it to be as part of me, just like breathing is, just like getting up in the morning. And that has changed the importance of art in my life in a different way. Every day I see how I'm changing and how I'm the same. And that comes from pen to paper and that creative process happening every day. And even understanding the switch that happens when I sit down in my studio to draw, to paint, like feeling that switch in that practice. And that's just something I've become very grateful for and definitely matters to me in my life.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, and I appreciate that it wasn't a particular piece, but it's the practice of doing it every day and what it means to you. And that's very personal. So thank you for sharing that. So I have the same question for Anita, and then we have a couple of questions that have been asked in the comments that we'll get to.
Oh, so for me, my work as a visual artist and my work as a researcher, or in my doctoral work, they intersect, and they intersect with the themes of space and place and power, right? So as a painter, I'm a painter who kind of abstracts landscapes, and I originally started out with this abstract. Maybe about in 2003, I began to do these abstractions where I embedded images of my ancestors in there, to kind of make a commentary on the fact that the places that we traverse, the spaces that we traverse, have been covered by people who came before us, and that we need to be cognizant of the spaces that we occupy. Also, the technical aspect of space, right? Space being an element of art and design. But as I began to explore what space and place mean, especially for people of color, that I began to write and to research with that in mind. And also as a visual artist, going into the realm of being a curator. So recently, looking at curation, thinking about some of the things that Vera said, thinking about what the task that we have, like Donna said, of bringing who to include and who not to include. So that's the power aspect, right? So when I curate, it's about power, but it's about not only the power of me, the curator, because the person who has the power controls the narrative, right? So I'm also giving power to those people that I'm bringing into that gallery space. So for instance, recently I curated an exhibition, which is still up through next Saturday, called Into the Open, and it's at the Detroit Artists Market. And it highlights the work of 7 women. And, it's quite I have a curatorial statement, but it's quite lengthy. But just know this, that it was hard to get to that place. But those are artists that I felt needed to be exposed more than they had already been exposed. And so again, it's my duty as an artist. So, when I create, I'm creating an exhibition. I'm creating a work of art. So curatorial work is just like creating on a large canvas for me, because I have an intent, I have a purpose, and I have a duty, actually, as a curator to, and as an artist, actually, to bring others along with me and to elevate them. So that is a purpose. That's one of the purposes that go into my work as an artist and as a curator. And as an artist, my purpose is to have people, invite people into those spaces that I've created, right? My intention is to invite you into that space, into that physical space of the gallery, and into the spaces that I've created within these paintings to help you, so that you get lost, so that you're kind of winding through these, these many stories that I'm telling with paint and with texture and with all of those devices that abstractionists employ.
Thank you.
Can I say that Hirsch exhibition is amazing? So it's up for another week. If you're around Detroit, go see it. Detroit Artist Market. It's really brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you, Donna.
And so, and if there are other places where we should be in Flint, in Detroit, or in Ann Arbor, be prepared to share those as part of your closing remarks. We do have a couple of questions in the comments. I want to make sure we get to those. The first one I'm going to direct towards Erin, because you spoke about public art. To what extent do Black artists have an opportunity to contribute public art that matters to underserved communities? How is such public art typically funded?
Okay, all right. I was having no technical difficulty with trying to unmute myself. But it's by the relationships that are built. So, for example, the project that myself and my partner, my business partner, Douglas Jones, did at the Virginia Walker Community Center. That particular project is a public art project in regards to a ancestral garden that we created, where we are growing herbs and flowers to beautify the community, but also be an avenue for teaching. And that particular grounds was almost by, I would say, synchronicity that it took place, that I was connected to it, because Joseph William Walker is also a relative, or was the godfather to a relative of mine. But needless to say, by the relationships that were built, Sidney Camp, who is a part of the Detroit Artist Corps Foundation, which is funded by the Knights Foundation, is how I and Doug were involved in that project. But it serves the community by beautifying it, essentially, at the base of it. And so the relationships that I had developed with another artist by just being out there, getting involved, that is how I got my footing in there, and focusing on what type of project would, like I said, beautify the community. So that how the public art project was something for me. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties as well.
So I think we did get the gist of what you were saying, that a lot of it comes through relationships and kind of being known in certain spaces and amongst your fellow artists. And then there was some foundation support for that particular project. I think that's fairly common, that there's foundation support for various artists to do public art projects. And then another question was, how does one recognize what is available for purchase in an art exhibition? And any of you, feel free to answer that question.
Oh, I'd love to say something about it. Because I've juried a couple of shows in Michigan since I arrived, and those seem to be set up to support local artists and to allow them to sell their works. And I just actually went to Traverse City in the middle of a snowstorm. We'll leave that alone. But they had a show there, and first of all, I was really amazed out of the artworks I selected that there were a number of Black artists and a number of artworks that were speaking and expressing present conditions and just conundrums in the artwork up in Northwest Michigan. And I was so pleased to see that. Also, a lot of artists just dealing with contemporary issues. And when I went there, some of it was for sale in the museum store, but I asked them, can you put this online? Because people want to see regional and local art that can't get there, anywhere from outside of Michigan to inside Michigan, who's going to Traverse City right now. So can you do it? And they put it all online. So I was like, hey, and I'm encouraging that as a way. Now, part of what's come out of this whole COVID lockdown is that we have new ways to connect virtually where artists can sell their work. And the other side of that question, Essence, for me is to buy the work, right? I gave a kind of virtual class at Spelman recently, which is about collecting for the students to realize that collecting is also a practice, that instead of investing in a condo, you might want to invest in some art, and at so many different levels. Instead of investing in an evening gown, maybe you can buy a piece of art. You have to be intentional about it. And this is what artists need. They need for you to buy their work, not just huge institutions. And so that's an important message I want to share, along with a shout out to like Stephanie James, who introduced me to you guys and what she does over at the Warsh Collection, a new show. I can't wait to see what's going on with her new show that just opened up. But also George Namdi and Belinda Tate and Rahima Barber over at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, and just all of the wonderful people who've just welcomed me into the community as I've gotten to know some of the artists who are working right now.
Oh, thank you for that. And I have to ask this question because it's one that I think you alluded to a little bit about collecting being a practice. And this was a question that I had on the list was, is it more important for art to be in museums or to be in people's homes? And I will ask that question of whoever would like to answer it.
So I'd like to just make a couple of comments about that. I think that number one, on the surface level, it's important that people buy art, right? And it's important, to piggyback on, I forgot who made I think it was Mary Schmidt Campbell, who talked about Black people in particular with money need to buy art from Black artists. They need to buy art, period. Because if you think about Swiss Beats collection, he has art that represents everybody. And I think that's so important, right? Because I think, especially as Black creators, we need to see whoever's creating, right? People need to see that. But it elevates when you buy it, when a collector buys your work, that validates in some respect your work. Even though if I never sold a painting, I would still paint, right? But we need collectors to buy our work. But the museum, right? The museum has always had this history of exclusivity. And in fact, throughout history, there have been places like the Met, for example, who positioned the museum as a private club to brown and Black people who were not admitted. And there are people who don't feel that they have always been welcomed to the museum. So that is another reason that David Driskell's positioning of the works in a museum was important, and having that work in a museum so you can see it, so people can see that this is, Mom, I've arrived, right? I've made it. So I think that for me, I think that they're equally important. From a sustainability perspective, because it is income. It is, some people think that the arts are ancillary, But for a lot of people who are artists, this is how they make their money. So they need to be supported, and then, to have it in a museum, well, then that elevates it into that larger canon. Okay, so I think they're both important.
Yeah. Could I add something to that?
Sure.
I just, this, you just brought up, there's a wide continuum, right? I mean, you can buy a local artist that you saw on Saturday when you went here and there was an exhibition and you've invested $500. Boom, that was a big investment. Okay. But what the museums have in terms of resources is often a part that curators play a huge role in presenting new, exciting work to an acquisition committee. And then they decide if that work is going to be purchased, and what they're going to do for next year. And it's following some kind of cachet that the museum is looking for in their competitive role with other museums. Oh, they acquired it at Titus Kafour. Oh, over here they have this. And so that becomes a part of this kind of institutional competitive practice. But the reality is that some of the works are so huge and unwieldy that it needs the resources of an institution to properly care and conserve them. They have the ability to store it and then pack it and ship it under all of these rigid conditions that allow the art world to thrive, right? You have to go by these rules and guidelines. So getting into the museum is critical. But I find that many artists actually donate their work to the museum. And I find that this is a really kind of paradoxical thing, because then museums think, oh, well, I've got some Black artists here. They didn't really invest in it. And it's such a really a crime, so that they didn't go out of their way to find out who to purchase, who to bring in, who to spend their time to learn, research about, and present. So these are huge issues within the art world. But I just wanted to say that, everybody can participate at different levels, right? Don't just depend on the institutions to do that work.
Right.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one more thing. Thank you, Vera, for that. And going back to your comment about collecting, that is important. As a collector, you collect for various reasons. And some people say they want to collect because, oh, this artist is hot, they're going to be famous, but you really don't know who's going to do what with their career. So you should just collect the art because eventually you don't know what you would have.
I was going to say something as well, that I think it's important for them to go into homes, because at the end of the day, as Dr. Bates said, you never know who's going to be what the future holds. It's more ahead of us than what's behind us. But it's what we do in the present as it relates to the past that influences the future. So until one gets into the museum, or until museums find, because they have, it's Google gobs of artists to pick from, who and what is relative towards the stories is being told. And so it's important for collectors to, purchase work and put it in the homes, because at the end of the day, also, we know that life is not promised. So if I myself am called home, who has my work? Where can my work be got from? You see what I'm saying? Versus just it coming straight from my home or from my family. Where can people go and find my work? And so as an artist, it's also important to catalog and have, where's your CV at? So people can identify where they can get your work, and it can be on loan or be purchased, from, personal or, and private collectors. So, I would say, like, a majority of the other panel has mentioned, that no one is more important than the other, but where is your work going to be accessible at? As well as, once again, the personal relationships that one builds. I have the, honor to work with the Flint Cultural Center Academy. So I'm working right there with the Flint Institute of Arts, where I'm going at least 2 days a week And, I'm very close with the staff there, as we're all, colleagues. But also, too, building a relationship. I was privy to join the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club and meet Alex May and Salvador Ponce, who, run the DIA. So, you know, not being afraid to speak up. Sometimes as artists, people are introverted and they like to let their work speak for them. But when you can, go up to an individual and greet yourself and, be well spoken or just be who you are, then that's essentially the best thing that you can do until your time comes, because it's always about just timing. When it's divine time, nobody can stop you. So the museums and the home collectors, it's all one and the same. So it's just timing.
Thank you for those thoughts. I want to share a few things that are happening that I'm aware of in Flint, and then I would like for each of you to share if there are places that we should go, things that we should check out as it relates to art, and then you can at the same time give your final and parting remarks, whatever you'd like to say on the subject. So the first thing I wanted to share is it was mentioned before about the exhibition that Ed Watkins has at the Flint Institute of Art. It's called Drawing from Life, and it is happening right now. There's also a artist talk that's happening on Saturday, February 19th from 2 to 2:45 in the Flint Institute of Art Theater. So that exhibition will be there until April 10th, and it is fantastic. Also, there's an exhibition called Sons, Seeing the Modern African American Male. And it opened on January 22nd, runs through April 16th. And when you walk in, you see the faces of African American men from the Flint community. There were 49 that are a part of that, including our president and CEO, Glenn Wilson. Communities First is the signature sponsor of the community gala that is associated and connected to this exhibition. So definitely go out and support the exhibition, and then hopefully we will see you at the community gala event that is coming up in a few months. And also wanted to share that in Flint we have the Warsh Collection, which regularly shows art by artists of the African diaspora, and many of them were featured in the film, and there are countless others. There's a new exhibition that just opened called Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and it is on view until August 20th. That's located on Saginaw Street in downtown Flint. Hopefully, we will see you at one of those places. That's great art to see in Flint. And with that, I think, Donna, we'll go with you first. Where should we go to see art in Detroit or anywhere? And then also, what are your parting comments for us today?
So I'm going to focus on Black spaces, Black art. Namdi's is definitely one place to go to see art in Detroit, as well as Norwest Gallery. Dobble's Bead Museum is an amazing, not only a space to installation, but also space to see export, from Africa, different parts of Africa, I should say. But an Irwin Gallery, which has opened in the last 3 or 4 years, somewhere in there, doing some brilliant work in Detroit. But there, with what has happened in our society, more of the Detroit galleries are understanding the importance of showing Black art in this very Black city. So you can see some amazing art in a lot of different galleries, but those are ones that are some ran particularly by Black artists and Black gallery owners. And I think the last thing I would like to share, when you're talking about representation and how that matters in galleries, in museums, and that's why I feel like it's so important that in those spaces and institutions we need more people that look like us in seats that can make decisions. So when we talk about the art on the wall and being represented in that way, that is very, very important. But those that make the decisions about what art goes on that wall, we need more people in those spaces too. So teaching what those spaces are so that next generation can make decisions that I want to be art director of this. I want to be management of that. Because I live in both worlds, managing art as well as creating it. And you can do both. So that's the final word I'd like to represent, that art, there's a lot of different ways where you can support and be part of the art world and change it.
Thank you for that. Erin, if you'd like to go next. I already shared a few of the spaces in Flint, but if there are other places that you would like to share where we can see Black art, and then your kind of final words for today's discussion.
So actually, the good Lord above has blessed me to be in two places at one time. Now my superpower is I can multiply myself. So I'm constantly between Flint and Detroit. So I have to acknowledge both places as I have work at Irwin House, as Ms. Jackson has expressed. So big ups to Omisha. She's doing her thing there and curating that space and really developing that. Uh, as it relates to Flint, Coma Bookstore, where I did get the pleasure of getting this David Driskell book, which is highly recommended. It's a Rizzoli, so it's a collector's item as well as very informative information in it. It's a Black-owned bookstore, and Dorian Jackson in Egypt are doing phenomenal things there, as Vice President has shown her face there, and they're also putting up works of art where you can also see some of my work on display. Shucks. I am just in love with the development that I'm seeing in Detroit as well as Flint. Also, I cannot be remiss to mention the Black Wall Street art collection down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I have work on display at as well, and had the privilege of doing a solo exhibition there, also entitled The Souls of Black Folks, during the heart of the pandemic, where a majority of my work did sell. So moving about the country has been a major thing for me, and now internationally, as I'll be venturing to Dominican Republic to do some studying and learning more things to enhance my craft. So please, by all means, visit my website to see some works that I've done and be able to purchase prints and consult with me about some original work that can also be purchased as well. I'm Aaron Whitaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anita, where should we go to see Black art? And then also your final words for today's conversation.
Okay, so first of all, please go see Into the Open at the Detroit Artists Market. I have I have 7 women who curated, and I think 3 of them are African American. One is from Brazil, and just everyone has a wealth of rich culture in that show. So please go see that. Also, as Donna mentioned, the Nnamdi Center for Contemporary Art, right now they have an exhibition up, I believe, through March, of newly acquired pieces for the Nnamdi collection. You can see some of my work there during this time. Many of my contemporaries, Tylon Sawyer, Jocelyn Rainey, just in a lot of new phenomenal artists that have been acquired, new for this area perhaps, but they have been acquired by Dr. Nnamdi and his group. My final words would be, I think that to create art is important. And in order to create more Black creators, we have to support them when they are younger, when they are children. There should be more arts programming in the schools. That is paramount. And from a standpoint of we're in a Midwestern working class city, pretty much. But as Black people, we need to support our children when they say they want to be artists. You know, many people of my generation have heard, oh, get something you can fall back on, or, you know, just because you're not, because I think people have the mindset that just because you don't go to work today, go to work every day at a certain time, punch a clock, or do work that you come home at the end of the day from feeling tired and you really don't like it that much, then it's not a real job. But being an artist is a real job because there's so much that goes into that. And there's so many facets of being an artist. You can be an educating artist. You can be an artist that's a studio artist. You can, you know, do museum practice. There's so many nuances to that. But I have encountered with even parents who have said to me, gosh, you know, I want to be a glass blower. But do Black people do that? I mean, these are literal conversations that people have had with me. Of course we do it, but the reason we don't think we do it is because we don't see ourselves represented. And then it's like the chicken or the egg. We don't see ourselves represented because we weren't encouraged to be a part of that. So we have always been creators, even though we've not been recognized always, but we've always been creators. And I just say we need to encourage each other and we need to support each other financially, you know, with buying people's art and recognizing that this is a viable profession.
Thank you so much for that. Extremely important points. And so, Vera, I'm going to allow you to answer the same question and close us out today.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I've been trying to jot down. I hope we can share on, you know, through our context more on that. So I wanted to point a couple of things out at UMA, which is the University of Michigan Museum of Art in Ann Arbor, that I worked with for a year. You know, I decided to leave for some critical reasons, but I'm really excited by some of the work that continues to manifest there that we got off the ground. One of them, for example, was a gallery devoted to African art. I was instrumental in doubling the size of that gallery while I was there. And it's wonderful to see it kind of fleshed out now with a new spaciousness. You know, that's often like what happens in the museum and where is the art placed in the museum. And I find that tension often at the DIA when I go to the DIA for an exhibit. You know, so sometimes you go and then you have these other kind of things that you're dealing with because of the realities, right? And so so there's a project there that Laura de Becker, who is a Belgian curator I work with, specializing in African art. You have many white curators specializing in African art. And I think we still need to relationship build while we change the field. And she's most excellent. And she put a project together, which is about restitution. The other side of what we were discussing about collecting art, that some of the art in our institutions need to be returned to the cultures and societies where they were taken. And they need to examine their holdings and to see what indeed does not really belong in their collection and invest in the idea of return. So she's done a lot of work on that, along with some other holdings there. Al Loving, I had acquisition while I was there, and Titus Kafour. So it's worth a visit. For what they're doing. They just got a Kahinda Wiley also on the ground floor. So over in Detroit, you mentioned the show at the Warsh Collection. You know, that's stunning. I'm definitely going over to see that. But I also looking to visit the DIA. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a show called Vanguard right now, the New Black Vanguard, that's up. It's a photography exhibit, art and fashion, that's up through April 17th. So I look forward to taking that. And of course, George Namdi, as you mentioned, we'll definitely be looking at his new installation as they open up. And then a show at the Scarab Club. I had the opportunity to give a lecture there something I work around, monuments and curating unsettling legacies, where I go into some really harsh racist material. But they have a show at the Scarab Club now called The Work of Our Hands, Black Women as a Cornerstone of a Culture. And that's up until February 26th. So maybe you have a chance to take that in. That's all I have that I found. So the wonderful examples you have.
And then Donna did let us know that she's actually in that show at the Scarab Club. So that's really exciting.
Essence,
Yes.
I'd like to say one more thing. DIA, Vera mentioned the DIA, and also Shirley Woodson. Shirley Woodson has an exhibition at the DIA, Shield of the Nile, Reflections of Shield of the Nile, and I think that is a must-see. Shirley Woodson is the eminent Kresge Fellow this year, and she has been creating art for decades, and should be more recognized. She's recognized, but should be more recognized than she is. So go see that.
And I think what I just heard you say, and that's why I was excited to have you each share where we should go, what we should see, because I think there's maybe not as much as we need, right? But there's probably more than we think out there. And so that's exciting. And you've given me some thoughts and ideas on new places to go and things to check out. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get somebody on our team to, jot all of those down, get the links, get the information so that we can share that out with all of those who attended the films, but then also with just kind of the general public so that they know these are the spaces and the places where you can go and see Black art right now. So I just want to thank each of you for the gift of your time and your wisdom and your experience today. Thank you for being with us on this panel, for helping us to think through this film and think through the world of art. It is greatly appreciated. We always say that we're going to be on for an hour, and it never seems to be an hour. We always go over. So thank you for also giving us the gift of that extra 26 minutes today. We're greatly appreciative. So I just want to say thank you to all of those who have participated this year in the African American Film Series. It has been phenomenal. And we also give our regards again to the family of Ed Bradley in his passing. So thank you all, and have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.